This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Councillor Philip Brooker, who is the leader of the Conservative group at Guildford Borough Council. Philip, welcome to the Guildford Dragon, and thank you for giving your time for this interview.
Yes, good afternoon, Martin.
So it's been some time now since some months have elapsed since the Borough Council election in May, and we've all had time to reflect. Now, in May, your party won 10 seats and is the second biggest group and the official opposition. But it's not back to anywhere near the dominating position it was in for most of the post-war period. Why do you think that is?
Well, on the doorsteps, where you were talking to residents, and they seem to be appreciative of our campaign and our personal engagement and liked our views. We increased our seats from 6 to 10. So I have to say that I think it was a positive campaign all in all.
Yeah, but I mean, you Conservatives in Guildford, you'd expect to win, wouldn't you?
Well, certainly, but we lost every single seat in the constituency of Guildford 4 years ago, and that will obviously take time to build up again. And we've made some very positive steps forward.
Okay, so during the campaign, members of your group promoted the Robin Horsley Battle for Guildford video, in which he encouraged voters to support your party and the Liberal Democrats as the only parties that would stop the North Street scheme. Did you approve of that video content yourself? And not when I say approve, I mean, did you? Obviously, you didn't have a chance to approve it before it went out, but do you think that it was okay? And many interpreted it as allegations of corruption.
Well, certainly, I've never heard of Robin Horsley. He was an independent campaigner. I'd never heard of him before the campaign. Certainly he was out there trying to object against North Street. You asked me if I approved of his campaign. I neither approved nor disapproved it. I certainly didn't promote it. But
it had an allegation. Well, people interpreted it as allegations of corruption. What would you say to that?
Well, I think they'll just have to ask them. He's entitled as an independent campaigner to say what he wanted to say. I don't necessarily consider that it was a campaign on that basis.
Okay. Do you believe that any R4GV councillors had any financial interest in the Debenhams or North Street schemes being approved?
I have no idea whatsoever. Cannot comment.
You think it may be possible?
I'm sorry, I just can't comment on that at all. I have no idea whatsoever.
Okay, and do you think that your colleagues Keith Whittam and David Bilby were correct in saying to people or recommending that people saw the video?
Well, again, they were campaigning in their own right. That was before I became leader of the party, and they are independent councillors and can do exactly what they want to do. It's not something that I did. I obviously saw the video and I was aware of it, and that's all I can really say on that matter.
Okay, we're getting quite a lot of flickering on your picture. I don't know if you can see that too.
I can see it flickering, yeah.
I don't know if there's you're not touching anything that could cause that.
I can't see anything I'm touching, no.
Okay, well, let's carry on then. So in your view, what effect did the video have on the election results? And why did the voters prefer the Lib Dems to you?
Well, I say on the doorstep, I was only campaigning in Warpleton. I cannot recall it coming up on the doorstep at all. If it did come up, it only came up once. So no, I don't think that it did have a big effect on our campaign. Certainly in Warpleton, it might have had a bigger campaign elsewhere, but then I wasn't involved in those particular campaigns.
So you don't think the video had a big effect?
Certainly didn't in Warpleton.
Okay, even though R4GV candidates were reporting that they were being accused of all kinds of things on the doorstep because of the video.
Well, they weren't in Walpolston, and I can't comment in other wards. I wasn't
But
campaigning in other wards.
you don't think the R4GB candidates in Walpolston were being challenged that way?
Well, if they were, then I know nothing about it. As I say,
Okay.
I was out there every single day knocking on doors. And if it came up, as I said, if it came up at all, it came up once. It was
Okay.
it was not a big issue.
Okay. So the truth is that even if your party had secured a majority at the council, you could not have stopped the developers' strong appeal case for North Street, could you?
Well, that is a planning matter, isn't it? And
Yeah,
that
of
had to
course.
be resolved through the planning committee.
Yeah, but I
Um,
mean, what I'm saying is a vote for the Conservatives or the Lib Dems or any party couldn't have prevented that appeal going forward. And it does seem that the developers have got a strong case.
well, they certainly couldn't have stopped the appeal going forward, no,
Yeah.
because that had already been there. So
Okay.
that went through in January, didn't it?
Well, the
Before the
refusal was
election.
in January. I'm not. The appeal was lodged, I think, around the time of the election. But I mean, the fact is that no one can stop an appeal being lodged, can they?
Well, no, because that's a private matter between the developer and the appeals process.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So since the election, the parlous state of the borough council's finances have become more apparent, and a major accounting error revealed. How much of the situation is GBC's own fault, and what should the previous and current administrations have done differently?
Well, you're right in saying that the council is in a very serious financial position. When the Tories left office 4 years ago, we had a AAA credit rating, and after 4 years of the R4G Lib Dem coalition, we are now at near bankruptcy. I believe that the coalition lost control of the finances, pursued unrealistic pet projects, and now they're considering selling off residents' assets to pay for these mistakes.
Okay, but they did have to deal with the pandemic.
Yes, so did every other council.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of councils are in trouble too. I mean,
Yeah, but don't forget the government gave the council a lot of money to
they
cover the
gave, that's
pandemic
true. They
issues.
gave them a lot of money, but not all the money they needed for the measures they took during the pandemic. And of course, the other factor, major factor, is that interest rates have risen.
As they have throughout Europe.
Yeah, but it doesn't make it any less of a problem for the council here, does it?
No, but a prudent council. I mean, you and I are old enough to know what has happened in the last 30 years before we got down to virtually zero interest rates around about 2010. They've been running at about 5% for that 30-year period. So
Okay.
any prudent council would have expected the rate of interest to rise at some time in the future.
And you don't think that any of the problem is down to the fact that the central government has cut all the grants to local government?
Any government would have had to cut grants to local government. I mean, if you talk about the pandemic, all the other parties were talking about locking down longer and harder than the Conservatives. So you could arguably be saying that if another government was in place, it would be even worse for the current councils.
Okay, but you're saying that if the Conservatives have been in charge in the last administration, we wouldn't be in the financial difficulties we are now at the GBC.
Well, I would think it particularly hard to see how the Conservative administration would have seemingly lost control of the finances to the extent that this has happened. Yes.
Okay. Now, there's been an appeal for cross-party cooperation to tackle the financial situation, but doesn't that compromise your duty to scrutinise the council?
Well, first of all, yes, we are happy to help with the cooperation, but I think you have to remember that on the day that the report was first published, the Liberal Democrats saw fit to publish a press release which blamed everything on the previous Conservative government. So I wouldn't have said that was a particularly good start.
Right.
in relation to we need it is for the benefit of the residents of Guildford if we can get this under control and sorted out, and therefore the Conservative Party will do everything possible to find out how we can best sort the situation out to the benefit of the residents.
Okay, but you still feel free to criticise and scrutinise if as
oh definitely, yes.
Okay.
So yes, there's a financial recovery group formed, of which our senior councillors are on it. I'm on it, and so is our finance spokesman. And we are going through every aspect of the accounts now and trying to find out where savings can be made.
Okay, so that's you and Councillor David Bilby.
Yes, those are the two Conservative representatives. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the legacy of the local plan adopted in 2019 continues. You were one of the councillors who voted for it at the time. Do you regret that now?
No, not at the time. No, I mean, at
No,
the time,
do you regret it now?
Do I regret it now? No, because we had to do it. The local plan was something that had to be put through at that time because legislation was changing at the end of May, which would have meant we would have even higher targets. And of course, the local plan gave certainty to the people of Guildford. If we didn't have that plan in place, then every developer could apply for anywhere, and it wouldn't have been determined by Guildford Borough Councillors, it would have been determined by the government. So no, at the time it was important to put it through, and I have to say that the previous council spent tens of thousands of pounds reviewing that and found the answer or the solution that the plan was perfectly sound. So no, it was a sound plan, it remains a sound plan, and it hasn't been cancelled.
Okay, but what would you say then to people who live in Horsley or Clarendon or some of the other areas, or Ash actually, where they say, you know, well, you haven't stopped the development. We've suffered lots of development that we don't want since the local plan was adopted.
Well, you'd have to ask tell me what sites have gone forward. But
well, generally, I mean, I'm not talking about a specific site. I'm saying that they feel that the local plan has, especially where in the villages which have lost their green belt protection, that development has been facilitated by the local plan, not controlled by it.
It was an absolute necessity to get that local plan put through at the time that it did go through. And as I say, it has been challenged by the previous administration and found to be perfectly sound. There is a review coming up in 2025, and obviously circumstances have changed since then, and it is time to review that plan and see if it is still sound.
I mean, I'm not sure it's been found sound. I think it wasn't the thinking that they didn't want to risk lodging a review because a different formula could have been applied, which would have increased the housing target.
Well, that applied at the time that we were passing the local plan back in May 2019.
Okay, but other councils didn't adopt a plan at that stage, and they don't seem to have suffered in the same way, do they?
Well, I don't know. You'll have to tell me what councils you're talking about. I was a councillor at Merrow at the time, and there was a possibility of an estate coming forward on the Clarendon golf course there. That was not in the local plan. And if we didn't have a local plan, that could have come forward and could have been passed. Okay. Well, I think essentially the local plan gave certainty to the people of Guildford, and at the time that it was passed, it was sound and remains to be sound.
Okay, now there is widespread concern that developments are going ahead despite insufficient infrastructure being put in place. For example, national health services, school places, public transport, road space, as well as sewage, water supply and power supply capacity. Do you think that the lack of infrastructure should be a sufficient reason for for GBC to be allowed to refuse applications on those grounds?
Oh, certainly, yes. I mean, if you look at the plan that we put forward, For instance, the amount of development was conditional on the A3 upgrades, on infrastructure upgrades taking place. Now, those upgrades have not taken place, and therefore the plan needs to be reviewed, and therefore the amount of sustainable housing also has to be considered in that scope. You have, you're talking about hospitals and everything else, and yes, the whole thing would need to be reviewed to affect that.
Okay, so when I interviewed Paul Spooner during when the plan was being formulated, he more or less promised that these developments wouldn't take place unless the infrastructure was put in place. But that in Ash, if you go to Ash, they're very worried about the health services capacity there, but it's not stopping all the developments that are going on in Ash.
Well, that was in the local plan. The local plan said, I mean, when you're talking about Paul Spooner, the development was conditional on the local, on the infrastructure being available. Now, in the 4 years since we left office, it's difficult to say exactly what has gone on. I haven't been following every single site by any means. So, no,
but
it
it's
was
not in the
conditional in the
council's
local plan that we had the infrastructure in place first.
But the infrastructure provision is not in the council's gift, is it? For instance, in Ash, a site was put aside by the developers for a new health centre, but none of the local GP practices wanted to take it on. So, but the housing is still going ahead in Ash.
Well, any site needs to have adequate access to doctors and surgeries and facilities like that. So, if those projects were passed whilst the Conservatives were not in office, then that should have been thoroughly questioned at that time by that particular administration.
Okay, so your party objected to those, did they?
I can't comment because I wasn't there.
Okay, but I mean, there would have been members of your party represented on the planning committee.
Well, there would have been parties, yes, but we only had six.
Yeah, I understand they weren't in control of the planning committee, but they still would have been able to vote against them on those grounds if they wanted to.
I'm sure yes. I mean, I don't know what their voting record is. You just have to go back and find out.
Okay, right. Now the Dragon Small survey in April showed 80% of respondents were in favour of height control, but the council seems powerless to resist applications for high-rise buildings. What is your view on building height control? The lack of control is your party's fault, isn't it?
Well, the heights and views policies of the last Conservative council have been largely ignored by the previous administration. Now, we did, if you're talking about North Street, we had 2 schemes that were ready to, which we were being proposing, both with about 8 stories high. And the previous coalition seemed to abandon that and went for tower blocks up to 15 stories high. Now, if the next Conservative government which comes in, which hopefully will be in 4 years' time, we will resurrect that document and put it at the forefront of all planning policy, and that will limit future building heights to about 8 stories in the town centre and 5 elsewhere.
So why didn't you put that in the plan in the first place?
So what plan?
In the local plan.
That was a
why didn't you put the height control in either part 1 or part 2 of the local, or ask for it?
It was a supplementary planning document that was applicable for all building.
But the supplementary planning document does not have that much power, does it? And we've seen that it doesn't because of the applications that have gone through.
Well, the power is dependent on the administration actually utilising those documents and seizing upon that power. Again, we were not in power for 4 years. We did have plans for North Street to have 8 stories, and we think that 13 and 15 stories is far too high, and we would go back to that plan.
Okay, so are you saying that the supplementary planning document is sufficient and therefore you don't need to do anything more, or that it's not sufficient and you do need to do more when you get back in power?
It is probably sufficient. I can't give a 100% answer on that, because I was involved in it at the time, and I took advice from various councils that had put in a strict height restriction, and whatever happened, if you, for instance, had a height restriction of 5 stories, every building came in at 5 stories high, and then you had uniformity of construction. And we felt that in the town centre in particular, we wanted varied construction. It's a hilly site, a hilly town, and it needed to be in keeping with the character of the town as well. And those two big things, the character in keeping and the heights and views policy, should have been sufficient. Certainly, I thought it was sufficient to stop this high-rise building.
Okay, but it didn't stop when you were in charge, the Solent development, which obviously was rejected unanimously by the council and your colleagues at the time. But nonetheless, a Conservative government approved it, didn't they?
I do not think that the heights and views policy was in force at that particular time when Solent was passed.
No, but it could have been refused, and it wasn't. It could have been refused by the Secretary of State, and it wasn't.
Well, that was up to the Secretary of State. We refused.
Yeah, he was a Conservative, wasn't he?
Who?
The Secretary of State at the time.
Yes, but the Secretary of State being a Conservative doesn't necessarily mean he's going to agree with every Conservative council.
Right, okay. So what's the future for Conservatives now in Guildford? How do you intend to persuade more voters to support you at further elections?
Well, first of all, we need to get the finances right in Guildford to do that. I think we've made a fairly good step forward. The Residents' Party lost, I think it was 10 seats altogether, and we're obviously going to build on that and try and get a Conservative majority council next time round.
Okay, and what are you going to be saying on planning then to persuade people in Horsley and Clarendon and that area that you can be trusted again with planning?
Because the local plan should be reviewed, I've said that, and we have a heights and views policy which the Conservative administration would strictly adhere to.
Okay, you're going to be standing, I know it's not the Borough Council, but presumably the Conservatives will be standing in the by-election that's been caused by the resignation of Colin Cross up by...
Yes, the Conservatives will have a candidate there, yes, certainly.
Okay, and are you expecting to win that one?
I think there's a reasonable chance, because we have to go back to the finances. You have to remember that the Conservatives have been in power in Guildford for years and years and years, something like about 90% of the history of Guildford, and we have never had a situation where we've been forced to potentially sell assets to cover our current account expenditure. So I think when the financial situation is fully understood by the people of Guildford, they will start coming back to the Conservatives as the party of competence with finance. Yes.
Okay, but that's the Borough Council. It's not the County Council factor, is it?
Yeah, well, on that particular issue, yes, it is the Borough Council. Okay. But I do think that the people choosing a county councillor will be reflecting on good value for money at the same time. Yes.
Okay, and finally, what do you make of? I did invite Julia McShane to participate in this series of interviews as well. I'm interviewing all the. I'd like to interview all the party group leaders at GBC, and you've all agreed, with the exception of Julia McShane, who hasn't even responded to my invitations. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you'll just have to ask the Liberal Democrats. It's not a factor for me.
Well, do you think it's being accountable? One of the Nolan principles is accountability. Do you think ducking interviews like that is showing accountability?
All I will say is that the council is in desperate need of leadership, and playing McCavity is probably not very helpful. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Councillor Philip Brooker, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that in future we will be interviewing you again. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much indeed. Thank you.